Hi there, and welcome to part 26 of the Cory Doctorow podcast reading of my 2005 novel, Someone Comes to Town, Someone Leaves Town. Um, it's not much news this week, and time's running short because I've just been kind of nose to the grindstone here on a new short story and the novel that I'm finishing. So I'll give you a little bit of news here. I just came back from the mail and found myself with a copy of the year's best science fiction 14, edited by David Hartwell and Catherine Kramer, which contains, among other things, my short story, The Things That Make Me Weak and Strange Get Engineered Away, along with a collaborative story by Toby Backel and Carl Schrader, a story by Neil Gaiman, a story by Kathleen Ann Goonan, a story by Al Reynolds, who, you may have heard, just signed a £1 million 10-book deal with Gollancz. More power to him, and Michael Swanwick. So, as well as lots of other talented writers, these are some of the best year's best collections around, and they're published by EOS, which is an imprint of Avon. So that looks pretty good. Like I say, I literally just brought that back down from the post box, so I have no idea kind of what it's like apart from that. I've read about half the stories, though, and really like them. Many of you have written on the news that there is a theatrical adaptation of Little Brother, have written to find out what you can do about getting a local adaptation, local theater company to do it. And it's actually, depending on your point of view, very simple or very complicated. As I understand it, the Griffin Theater, which is a production company that did the adaptation, has a healthy and active licensing program for licensing its productions to other companies, and I'm sure on very reasonable terms. And if you have a local theater company that you like, you might ask them to contact Griffin about licensing production. I don't think Griffin's going on tour or anything. For one thing, there are some young people in the cast who I expect have school. But in any event, it's if you are interested and you are involved in theater and you do have friends around who are theatrically inclined, that is one way to get the production to your school or to your local region, rather. I'm not sure about a video of the production. I put up some short video excerpts of the production this week. There, my agent explained that there was something incredibly complicated and irrational to do with videos of plays conflicting in some technical, narrow sense with film adaptation rights, which we have, as you know, sold to another producer. So it may be that we can get around this by kind of appealing to everyone's human good sense, but this is not an area in which good sense is known for its prevalence. So it may be that, in fact, a video from the production, at least one that's legitimate and authorized, will not be appearing. This is not my best outcome, unfortunately, but it appears that this is the way the cookie bounces or the ball crumbles or whatever it is. All right, that's enough. On to the reading from the book, Someone Comes to Town, Someone Leaves Town. This is part 26. We're, by my progress bar visual estimate here, I think this is about 3/4 of the way through. I actually, every time I do this reading, I just go to my browser and open up the URL for the HTML version. That's at craphound.com/someone. And so my best gauge of how we're doing here is this scroll bar here. All right, then. I'm just going to clear my throat one more time. Fair warning. Oh, you know what? Before I read, I do have to tell you something. Darren Brown, the illusionist, mentalist, and psychic debunker of psychics. Darren Brown, we went and saw his show last week at the theater in the Strand, the Adelphi Theater in the Strand. And he's a friend of ours. We know him through Neil Gaiman. He's just a lovely guy, and we know him socially. And so we went and saw the play and then had dinner with saw the show and then had dinner with him. This is the most amazing magic show I've seen, possibly with the exception of some of the better Penn and Teller shows I've seen, but on par with Penn and Teller, and absolutely flabbergasting. The finale, I'm still scraping my jaw off the ground about the finale. Darren Brown's videos, you can buy them. He's got a lot of stuff up on YouTube, and he's got a very good blog as well. So if I were you, I would go and seek out some Darren Brown videos. He's got a book as well about how the science of illusions and how hypnosis works and so on that I also recommend, called Tricks in the Mind. And if that floats your boat and you are in London, he's just added 3 more nights. You absolutely should go see this show. It was my highlight of my season, I think. Anyway, now I'm going to read you from Someone Comes to Town, Someone Leaves Town. They got into Kurt's car at 5 p.m., just as the sun was beginning to set. The sun hung on the horizon, right at eye level, for an eternity, slicing up their eyeballs and into their brains. Summer's coming on, Alan said. And we've barely got the market covered, Kurt said. At this rate, it'll take 10 years to cover the whole city. Alan shrugged. It's the journey, dude, not the destination. The act of organizing all these people, of putting up the APs, of advancing the art, it's all worthwhile in and of itself. Kurt shook his head. You want to eat Vietnamese? Sure, Alan said. I know a place, he said, and nudged the car through traffic and onto the Don Valley Parkway. Where the hell are we going? Alan said, once they'd left the city limits and entered the curved, identical cookie-cutter streets of the industrial suburbs in the north end. Place I know, Kurt said. It's really cheap and really good. All the Peel Region cops eat there. He snapped his fingers. Oh yeah, I was going to tell you about the cop, he said. You were, Alan said. So, one night I'd been diving there. Kurt pointed to an anonymous, low-slung, sprawling brown building. They print hockey cards, baseball cards, monster cards, you name it. He sipped at his donut store coffee and then rolled down the window and spat it out. Shit, that was last night's coffee, he said. So one night I was diving there and I found, I don't know, 50, 100 boxes of hockey cards, slightly dented at the corners in the trash. I mean, hockey cards are just paper, right? The only thing that makes them valuable is the companies infusing them with marketing juju and glossy pictures of mullet-head, no-tooth jocks. Tell me how you really feel, Alan said. Sorry, Kurt said. The hockey players in junior high were real jerks. I'm mentally scarred. So I'm driving away and the law pulls me over. The local cops, they know me mostly, 'cause I phone in B&Es when I spot them, but these guys had never met me before. So they get me out of the car and I explain what I was doing and I quote the part of the Trespass to Property Act that says I'm allowed to do what I'm doing, and then I open the trunk and I show them and he busts a nut. You mean you found these in the garbage? My kid spent a fortune on these things. In the garbage? He keeps saying, in the garbage? And his partner leads him away and I put it behind me. But then a couple nights later I go back and there's someone in the dumpster up to his nipples in hockey cards. The cop, Alan said. The cop, Kurt said. Right. That's the story about the cop in the dumpster, huh? Alan said. That's the story. The moral is, we're all only a sea hair away from jumping in the dumpster and getting down on it. Sea hair? I thought you were trying not to be sexist. C stands for cock, okay? Alan grinned. He and Kurt hadn't had an evening chatting together in some time. When Kurt suggested that they go for a ride, Alan had been reluctant. Too much on his mind these days, too much Danny on his mind. But this was just what he needed, what they both needed. Okay, Alan said. We gonna eat? We are going to eat, Kurt said. The Vietnamese place is just up ahead. I once heard a guy there trying to speak Thai to the waiters. It was amazing. It was like he was a tourist even at home, an ugly, fucked up tourist. People suck. Do they? Alan said. I quite like them. You know, there's pretty good Vietnamese in Chinatown. This is good Vietnamese. Better than Chinatown? Better situated, Kurt said. If you're going dumpster diving afterwards, I'm going to take your cherry, buddy. He clapped a hand on Alan's shoulder. Real people didn't touch Alan much. He didn't know if he liked it. God, Alan said, this is so sudden. But he was happy about it. He tried to picture what Kurt actually did any number of times, but he was never very successful. Now he was going to actually go out and jump in and out of the garbage. He wondered if he was dressed for it, picturing bags of stinky kitchen waste, and decided that he was willing to sacrifice his jeans and the old Gap shirt he'd bought one day after the shirt he'd worn to the store, the wind-up toy store, got soaked in a cloudburst. The Vietnamese food was really good, and the family who ran the restaurant greeted Kurt like an old friend. The place was crawling with cops, a new 2 or 3 every couple minutes, stopping by to grab a salad roll or sandwich or a go cup of pho. Cops always know where to eat fast and good and cheap, Kurt mumbled around his mouth full of pork chop and fried rice. That's how I found this place, all the cop cars in the parking lot. Alan slurped out the last of his pho and chased down the remaining hunks of rare beef with his chopsticks and dipped them in chili sauce before popping them in his mouth. Where are we going? He asked. Kurt jerked his head in the direction of the great outdoors. Wherever the fates take us. I just drive until I get an itch, and then I pull into a parking lot and hit the dumpsters. There's enough dumpsters out this way I could spend 50 or 60 hours going through them all, so I've got to be selective. I know how each company's trash has been running. Lots of good stuff, or mostly crap lately, and I trust my intuition to take me to the right places. I'd love to go to the Sega or Nintendo dumpsters, but they're like Stalag 13, razor wire and motion sensors and armed guards. They're the only companies that take secrecy seriously. Suddenly, he changed lanes and pulled up the driveway of an industrial complex. Spidey senses tingling, he said, as he killed his lights and crept forward to the dumpster. Ready to lose your virginity, he said, lighting a cigarette. I wish you'd stop using that metaphor, Alan said. Ick. But Kurt was already out of the Buick, around the other side of the car, pulling open Alan's door. That dumpster is full of cardboard, he said, gesturing. It's recycling. That one is full of plastic bottles. More recycling. This one, he said, oofing as he levered himself over it, talking around the maglite he clenched between his teeth, is where they put the good stuff. Looky here. Alan tried to climb the dumpster's sticky walls, but couldn't get a purchase. Kurt, standing on something in the dumpster that crackled, reached down and grabbed him by the wrist and hoisted him up. He scrambled over the dumpster's transom and fell into it, expecting a wash of sour kitchen waste to break over him, but finding himself instead amid hundreds of 5-inch cardboard boxes. What's this? He asked. Kurt was picking up the boxes and shaking them, listening for the rattle. This place is an import-export wholesaler. They throw out a lot of defective products since it's cheaper than shipping it all the way back to Taiwan for service. But my kids can fix it and sell it on eBay. Here, he said, opening a box and shaking something out, handing it to him. He passed the light over to Alan, who took it, unmindful of the drool on the handle. It was a rubber ducky. Alan turned it over and saw that it had a hard chunk of metal growing out of its ass. More of these, huh? Kurt said. I found about 1,000 of them last month. They're USB keychain drives, low capacity, like 32 megs. Plug them in and they show up on your desktop as a little hard drive. They light up in all kinds of different colors. The problem is, they've all got a manufacturing defect that makes them glow in just one color, whatever shade the little gel carousel gets stuck on. So I got a couple thousand of these back home, but they're selling briskly. Go get me a couple cardboard boxes from that dumpster over there and we'll snag a couple hundred more. Alan gawped. The dumpster was 7 feet cubed, the duckies a few inches on a side. There were thousands and thousands of duckies in the dumpster, more than they could ever fit in the Buick. In a daze, he went off and pulled some lightly flattened boxes out of the trash and assembled them, packing them with duckies that Kurt passed down from atop his crunching, cracking mound of doomed duckies that he was grinding underfoot. Once they'd finished, Kurt fussed with moving the boxes around so that everything with a boot print was shuffled to the bottom. We don't want them to know that we've been here, or they'll start hitting the duckies with a hammer before they pitch 'em out. He climbed into the car and pulled out a bottle of window cleaner and some paper towels and wiped off the steering wheel and the dash and the handle of his flashlight, then worked a blob of hand sanitizer into his palms, passing it to Alan when he was done. Alan didn't bother to point out that as Kurt had worked, he'd transferred the flashlight from his mouth to his hands and back again a dozen times. He thought he understood that this ritual was about Kurt assuring himself that he was not sinking down to the level of rummies and other garbage pickers. As if reading his mind, Kurt said, "You see those old rum-dums pushing a shopping cart filled with empty cans down Spadina? Fucking morons. They could be out here pulling LCDs that they could turn around for $10 a pop, but instead they're rooting around like raccoons in the trash, chasing after nickel deposits. But then what would you pick?" Kurt stared at him. "Are you kidding me? Don't you see? There's 100 times more stuff than I could ever pull. Christ, if even one of them had a squint of ambition, we could double the amount we save from the trash." "You're an extraordinary person," Alan said. He wasn't sure he meant it as a compliment. After all, wasn't he an extraordinary person too? Alan was stunned when they found a dozen hard drives that spun up and revealed themselves to be of generous capacity, and moreover stuffed with confidential-looking information when he plugged them into the laptop that Kurt kept under the passenger seat. He was floored when they turned up 3 slightly elderly Toshiba laptops, each of which booted into a crufty old flavor of Windows, and only one of which had any obvious material defects, a starred corner in its LCD. He was delighted by the dumpsters full of plush toys, by the lightly used office furniture, by the technical books and the CDs of last year's software. The smells were largely inoffensive. Kurt mentioned that the picking was better in the winter when the outdoors were one big fridge, but Alan could hardly smell anything except the sour smell of an old dumpster and occasionally a whiff of coffee grounds. They took a break at the Vietnamese place for coconut ice and glasses of sweet iced coffee, and Kurt nodded at the cops in the restaurant. Alan wondered why Kurt was so pleasant with these cops out in the boonies, but so hostile to the law in Kensington Market. "How are we going to get connectivity out of the market?" Kurt said. "I mean, all this work, and we've hardly got 4 or 5 square blocks covered." "Buck up," Alan said. "We could spend another 2 years just helping people in the market use what we've installed, and it would still be productive." Kurt's mouth opened, and Alan held his hand up. "Not that I'm proposing that we do that. I just mean there's plenty of good that's been done so far. What we need is some publicity for it, some critical mass, and some way that we can get ordinary people involved. We can't fit a critical mass into your front room and put them to work." So what do we get them to do?" It's a good question. There's something I saw online the other day that I wanted to show you. Why don't we go home and get connected? There's still plenty of good diving out there. No need to go home anyway. I know a place. They drove off into a maze of cul-de-sacs and cheaply built gaudy monster homes with triple garages and sagging rain gutters. The streets had no sidewalks, and the inevitable basketball nets over every garage showed no signs of use. Kurt pulled them up in front of a house that was indistinguishable from the others and took the laptop from under the Buick seat, plugging it into the cigarette lighter and flipping its lid. There's an open network here, Kurt said, as he plugged in the wireless card. He pointed at the dormer windows in the top room. How the hell did you find that? Alan said, looking at the darkened windows. There was a chain-link gate at the side of the house, and in the back, an above-ground pool. Kurt laughed. These security consultants, he made little quotes with his fingers, wardrobe all over Toronto. They went from one end of the city to the other with a GPS and a wireless card and logged all the open access points they found, then released a report claiming that all of these access points represented ignorant customers who were leaving themselves vulnerable to attacks and making the internet connections available to baby-eating terrorists. One of the access points they identified was mine, for Christ's sakes, and mine was open because I'm a crazy fucking anarchist, not because I'm an ignorant consumer who doesn't know any better. And that got me to thinking that there were probably lots of people like me around, running open APs. So one night, I was out here diving, and I was really trying to remember who'd played the Sundance Kid in Butch Cassidy, and I knew that if I only had a net connection, I could Google it. I had a Stumbler, an app that logged all the open Wi-Fi access points that came into range of it, and a GPS attachment that I dived that could interface with the software that mapped APs onto a map of Toronto, so I could just belt the machine in there on the passenger seat and go driving around until I had a list of all the wireless internet that I could see from the street. So I got kind of bored and went back to diving, and then I did what I usually do at the end of the night. I went driving around some of the residential streets just to see evidence of humanity after a night in the garbage, and also because people out here sometimes put out nice sofas and things. When I got home, I looked at my maps, and there was tons of access points out by the industrial buildings, and some on the commercial strips, and a few out here in the residential areas. But the one with the best signal was right here, and when I clicked on it, I saw the name of the network was ParasiteNet. Alan said, huh? Because ParasiteNet was Kurt's name for his wireless project, though they hadn't used it much since Alan got involved and they'd gotten halfway legit. But still. Yeah, Kurt said, that's what I said. Huh? So I googled ParasiteNet to see what I could find, and I found an old message I posted to toronto.talk.wireless when I'd started out, a kind of manifesto about what I planned to do, and Google had snarfed it up, and this guy, whoever he is, must have read it and decided to name his network after it. So I figure, this guy wants to share packets with me, for sure, and so I always hunt down this AP when I want to get online. You never met him, huh? Never. I'm always out here at 2 a.m. or so there's never a light on. Keep meaning to come back around 5 some afternoon and ring the bell and say hello. Never got to it. Alan pursed his lips and watched Kurt prod at the keyboard. He's got a shit-kicking net connection, though, tell you what. Feels like a T1, and the IP address comes off an ISP in Waterloo. You need a browser, right? Alan shook his head. You know, I can't even remember what it was I wanted to show you. There's some kind of idea kicking at me now, though. Kurt shifted his laptop to the back seat, mindful of the cords and the antenna. What's up? Let's do some more driving around. Let it perk, okay? You got more dumpsters you want to show me? Brother, I got dumpsters for weeks, months, years. It was the war driving, of course. Alan called out the names of the networks that they passed as they passed them, watching the flags pop up on the map of Toronto. They drove the streets all night, watched the sun go up, and the flags multiplied on the network. Alan didn't even have to explain it to Kurt, who got it immediately. They were close now, thinking together in the feverish drive time on the night-dark streets. Here's the thing, Kurt said, as they drank their coffees at the Vesta Lunch, a grimy 24-hour diner that Alan only seemed to visit during the smallest hours of the morning. I started off thinking, well, the cell companies are screwed up because they think that they need to hose the whole city from their high towers with their powerful transmitters, and my little boxes will be low power and smarter and more realistic and grassroots and democratic. Right, Alan said. I was just thinking of that. What could be more democratic than just encouraging people to use their own access points and their own internet connections to bootstrap the city? Yeah, Kurt said. Sure, so you won't get to realize your dream of getting a free internet by bridging down to the big cage at 151 Front Street, but we can still play around with the hardware. And convincing people who already know why Wi-Fi is cool to join up has got to be easier than convincing shopkeepers who've never heard of wireless to let us put antennae and boxes on their walls. Right, Kurt said, getting more excited. Right. I mean, it's just ego, right? Why do we need to control the network? He spun around on his cracked stool, and the waitress gave him a dirty look. Give me some apple pie, please, he said. This is the best part. It's going to violate the hell out of everyone's contracts with their ISPs. They sell you an all-you-can-eat internet connection, and then they tell you that they'll cut off your server if you're too hungry. Well, fuck that. It's not just community network. It'll be civil disobedience against shitty service provider terms of service. There were a couple early morning hardhats in the diner who looked up from their yogi eggs to glare at them. Kurt spotted them and waved. Sorry, boys. Ever get one of those ideas that's so good you can't help but do a little dance? One of the hardhats smiled. Yeah, but his wife always turns me down. He socked the other hardhat in the shoulder. The other hardhat grunted at his coffee. Nice. Very nice. You're going to be a lot of fun today, I can tell. They left the diner in a sleeped-up haze and squinted into the sunrise and grinned at each other and burped up eggs and sausages and bacon and coffee and headed toward Kurt's Buick. Hang on, Alan said. Let's have a walk, okay? The city smelled like morning, dew and grass and car exhaust and baking bread and a whiff of the distant Cadbury's factory, oozing chocolate miasma over the hills and streetcar tracks. Around them, millions were stirring in their beds, clattering in their kitchens, passing water and taking on vitamins. It invigorated him, made him feel a part of something huge and all-encompassing, like being in his father, the mountain. Up there, Kurt said, pointing to a little playground atop the hill that rose sharply up DuPont towards Christie, where a herd of plastic rocking horses swayed creakily in the breeze. Up there, Alan agreed, and they set off, kicking droplets of dew off the grass beside the sidewalk. The sunrise was 1,000 times more striking from atop the climber, filtered through the new shoots on the tree branches. Kurt lit a cigarette and blew plumes into the shafting light, and they admired the effect of the wind whipping it away. I think this will work, Alan said. We'll do something splashy for the press, get a lot of people to change the name of their networks. More people will use the networks, more will create them. It's a good plan. Kurt nodded. Yeah, we're smart guys. Something smashed into Alan's head and bounced to the dirt below the climber. A small, sharp rock. Alan reeled and tumbled from the climber, stunned, barely managing to twist to his side before landing. The air whooshed out of his lungs and tears sprang into his eyes. Gingerly he touched his head. His fingers came away wet. Kurt was shouting something, but he couldn't hear it. Something moved in the bushes, moved into his line of sight, moved deliberately into his line of sight. Danny. He had another rock in his hand, and he wound up and pitched it. It hit Alan in the forehead, and his head snapped back, and he grunted. Kurt's feet landed in the dirt a few inches from his eyes, big boots a-jangle with chains. Davy flitted out of the bushes and onto the plastic rocking horses, jumping from the horse to the duck to the chicken, leaving the big springs beneath them to rock and creak. Kurt took 2 steps toward him, but Davy was away, under the chain-link fence and over the edge of the hill leading down to DuPont Street. You okay? Kurt said, crouching down beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder. Need a doctor? No doctor, Alan said. No doctors. I'll be okay. They inched their way back to the car, the world spinning around them. The hardhats met them on the way out of the Vesta lunch, and their eyes went to Alan's bloodied face. They looked away. Alan felt his kinship with the woken world around him slip away and knew that he would never, truly, be a part of it.